My name is Ali Velshi. I am a host with Al Jazeera America. I host a show called Real Money with Ali Velshi, and it starts in about an hour and 45 minutes. So as soon as we finish here, I'm going to go across and do that. But one of the topics that we cover a great deal is energy. As you know, we are awash in energy in this country, or we're awash in natural gas. It's basically free. And it solves all problems. It lowers the price of electricity. Pretty soon they'll be able to use it to grow hair. But it has definitely, the discourse about energy on so many levels in this country has changed and evolved in the last 10 years or 15 years. We've gone from constraints to a real awareness about environmental dangers, to excitement about how energy is going to be the savior and possibly the next big thing. I know in the wake of the Great Recession, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that energy will be the next big thing, the next big driver of the American economy. We have, to some degree, more sophisticated conversations about energy than we have in the past, but to some of, in fact, many of my panelists, I think all of them here, feel that the conversation actually isn't broad enough or sophisticated enough in terms of what our mix of energy needs to be in this country and what the benefits versus the shortcomings are of our current mix of energy. So the conversation today is, are renewables still relevant? I'm going to guess that most of you in here think so, but let me just ask you a question. Show of hands. Are they still relevant? Yes? Is there anybody who thinks they're not? Which is not necessarily, I think my panelists will agree, is not representative of everybody's view. There are some people who either don't think they're still relevant or will actively make a case that they are not relevant. Unfortunately, none of those people are represented on the panel. So I'll take it upon myself to ask their questions as if they were here. On my far right, your left, is James Cameron. He's the chairman of Climate Change Capital. Richard Saines is a partner and head of North American Climate Change and Environmental Markets at Baker & McKenzie. Richard Sandor is a senior fellow at the Milken Institute. He's the chairman and CEO of Environmental Financial Products. He's a lecturer in law and economics at the University of Chicago Law School. Jigar Shah is the CEO of Jigar Shah Consulting, which doesn't give you the whole story. All of these people have got long and deep experience in the area of either energy or financial markets. So I want to, James, let's start with you. Obviously, you come from a perspective where they are still relevant, but in the current environment where it's so cool to talk about all the energy and the cheaper energy that we have right now, how do you keep the conversation about renewables relevant? How do you bring it back to the fore?
So the first way to do that is to say that we are in a process of shifting the system for delivering energy to people, partly because we want to maintain economic development in all parts of the world, partly because we need to reduce our emissions in order to stay the sane side of the climate change evidence, and partly because we want to build a better system. We always want to think about what lies ahead that's better than we have to date. And there's tremendous innovation in the energy sector, particularly in our research institutions, that we want to capture and put into practice. So clearly, gas, particularly given tremendous finds of these reserves around the world, the US being a prime example, but everybody is finding reserves of gas, is now part of the story of how an energy system is remade. But one of the challenges we face at the moment is that the exuberance over gas has made us feel as if we might possibly be able to extend the system that we have for longer, because this is a fossil fuel that we're kind of familiar with and we can apply without too much change. Whereas renewables look like they're a challenge to the system as a whole. They start to play around with business models that are well established. They make the incumbents feel uncomfortable, which of course is partly why I'm attracted to them. Mm-hmm. I see that the renewable energy technologies, provided you think systemically, i.e. you think at the same time as to what's the distribution system, what's the network that works best with renewables, what's the regulatory system that provides access for multiple types of renewable energy, how does distributed power actually build a more robust and stable and secure system for delivering energy and power. And that, to my mind, is a more interesting conversation. How does renewable energy technology combine with grid systems, with energy management systems, with control mechanisms, with the ability to manage demand on your mobile phone? That's interesting, but it's disruptive. So I think at the moment and we can come back to this, I think we're being overexcited about the transformative nature of gas. And it's distracting us from the potential of remaking a system that delivers more and better because gas is combined with multiple other renewable energy technologies. And it displaces coal and the dirtier fossil fuels. And as a result, we
do feel better about it.
Yeah, so in the end, the new system is better than the old on these multiple levels. It delivers at each and every one of them. Because the problem with the climate change issue is that it's all about everything. It encompasses every aspect of our lives. And the limits that it imposes upon us are hard. Right? If we make mistakes with the energy system of the future, it will hurt. Right? And so this is a way of thinking about how you might make an attractive solution from an economic point of view meet a necessary solution from an environment point of view.
So, Jigar, I'm going to ask you, are we just inert? Are we have a system that largely works, and as you said, we've been able to make it incrementally better by thinking about gas. What stops us from, as a society and an economy, wholeheartedly embracing renewables? Because there are lots of cases made by incumbent players about why it doesn't work as well.
Well, I think when you look at the data shows that roughly 70% of everything we've added to the grid in the United States since '08 is renewable. So when you think about natural gas, most of the natural gas power plants that we built in the United States was built in the 90s by Enron and others. And what we did is, for a temporary period of time, we burned a lot more gas because gas was below 380 million BTU. When it went above that, we started burning more coal. And you saw that in 2013, we burned 14% less gas, according to the Energy Information Administration, for power than we did in 2012. So, the fact that we added some gas turbines here and there to provide reliability without ever actually running them doesn't actually bother me, right? I mean, ultimately, the stuff that we've run, the stuff that we've actually added to the grid that runs all the time is wind, solar, biomass, geothermal. And that's where people are making money. I mean, I think this notion, look, I don't have to win over the Wall Street Journal. I'm actually fine for them to be completely incompetent on this issue and for investors to miss it, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not missing it. I'm making a ton of money, not missing it, right? And a lot of the folks that I consult for are not like losing money here because they actually see the opportunity. And you see that with, SunEdison stock is up, what, 800%? Canadian Solar stock is up 800%. It was the largest growth last year was the solar ETF, 130% up or so. And so, now you've got the SunEdison YieldCo coming out, and everyone's clamoring for this paper. We actually have more investors seeking this kind of investment than we have paper to offer them. Today, we're long money and short deals in this space. And so I don't really care that much if everyone gets it, as long as we have plenty of money to fund the growth rates that we're on right now.
Richard, you of course understand the finances, the capital flows in and out of it, and give me some sense of what you're seeing. Is the smart money, like Jigar, ignoring conventional wisdom and moving toward something that looks like it's more the future?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think, picking up on James's point, I would take the viewpoint that natural gas is a bridge fuel. It'll probably see us through 2030 or 2035. And I think that this plentiful supply of gas will solve environmental objectives that a significant portion of the world is seeing. So I do believe that you'll see a substitution of gas for coal, ultimately. You'll see a lot in the peaking side particularly. And then you'll see a lot of it picked up on renewables, which are now about 16, 17, 18%, kind of matching nuclear. So I think between coal and nuclear, you have an enormous opportunity to switch into renewables. And you have to look at a couple of things. If you take a look at slide 12, if you can. Once we put in standards like production subsidies, renewable portfolio standards, you don't get rid of them, right? So we had the soldiers outfitted in 1954 for another war in continental Europe, and we subsidized wool and mohair. It's still on the books, okay? We also subsidized sugar to prevent an invasion by Fidel Castro of continental America. It still exists. The simple fact of it is legislation is never reversed. If you take a look at 14,
Slide 14.
we've got 29 states with the renewable portfolio standards, plus DC, plus Puerto Rico. And if you take a look at trends worldwide and you throw up 19, that basically pricing energy, whether and renewables, through REC markets or through carbon pricing, it's thriving in Europe. And if you look at the map carefully, you can see the level of inventive activity in renewable energy and environment is directly proportional to the distance from Washington, D.C. Okay, so the further you go, the more activity you have. 7 exchanges in China, a PAT system in India, Rio looking at it. Just go away from Washington, D.C., and you'll see where the world is heading. And it's in favor of renewables. And then one last slide, throw up 18. Perhaps the big sleeper is India, which has a big REC program, which some people are estimating, could be a $16 to $20 billion market in the next 3 to 5 years. And it's just beginning this year, and we've done $400 or $500 million in trades. So there's a country that doesn't ascribe to pricing or encouraging renewables, yet is going to have one of the biggest renewable markets. China, which doesn't subscribe to it, has 7 climate exchanges. So I come down to focus away from Washington, D.C., and look at what's happening west. And needless to say, and just to finish it off, California leads the nation. It's got a cap and trade system here.
That's right.
It's functioning very well. It's bigger than the lumber markets in America. It's bigger than oats. It's a thriving market. It's about to team up with Quebec. And you may find that the United States comes from a federal system where policy is set at the local level and flows back. So I think those all convince me. The stickiness of legislation supporting it, the federal nature of the United States, the trends in India and China all suggest that renewables will continue to grow. And most importantly, you can't repeal legislation.
It's sort of what Winston Churchill said, right? Which is never fail to count on the U.S. to do the right thing after they've exhausted all of their options.
Right, that's right.
Can I just comment on that? I mean, look, Richard, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think you bring a lot of.
It would be okay if you did disagree.
That's
Well, I'm leading
Most
up to, I'm
people
leading
do
up to that.
disagree,
This
right?
is
You
my
know
soft
that.
way of disagreeing with you. Can you put 19 back up, please, the slide?
You're going to use this slide against him?
So,
Are you a lawyer?
well, maybe.
Yes.
I try not to be. Australia, okay, the big green continent there with all the arrows connecting to it. I mean, the reality is it's gone 180 degrees due to the political change, okay? Europe, which boasted, 30 euro carbon prices a few years ago, has suffered through a series of reasons very serious threats to the stability of the carbon system there and the pricing mechanism there. They're trying to improve that now. They're talking about some structural reforms. China is a bright spot, frankly, and there are very good stories. So fundamentally, the trend lines are in the right direction, but this is not a foregone conclusion. And the question of this panel, a lot of people probably take the position, oh, that's a silly question. Of course, they're relevant. I think it's a profound question because the reality is that with the innovations in the natural gas sector and fracking and so forth, there is a risk that the momentum that the renewable sector has earned despite challenging incumbents and reinventing the systems, as James was saying, there's still so much more that needs to be done to scale it up globally to the level that is going to be needed to properly respond not only to the needs of people to have energy and electricity, et cetera, but also to address the climate change issue. So while natural gas is as Richard said, a bridge fuel, the question is how long is that bridge, and do we have enough ability to wait to get to the other side of that bridge before we suffer serious consequences for the failure to get our energy systems under control from a greenhouse gas
wait a second,
perspective.
we're conflating a whole bunch of issues together, which I think are important to separate. In Australia, you have 1 million solar home systems installed for a population of 22 million people. Just to compare that to the United States, we have 500,000 installed here, and we will have 10 million deployed by 2020. There is no stopping the juggernaut that is renewables. Now, when you want to talk about natural gas, everyone hates gas for power generation. Let's be clear, right? DuPont, Dow, everyone loves natural gas. They're going to bring their industrial capacity back to the United States. There's going to be this huge cliff of natural gas demand that comes in 2017 because of that, which is fantastic, and it's glad to bring the jobs back to the United States from the other places around the world. But every single CEO, without exception, in the electric utility industry in the United States hates gas. Why? Because 30 days ago, 15% of all of the deregulated direct access electricity suppliers in the United States went out of business. Why? Because natural gas spiked 30% on them, and they had fixed price contracts with customers. They went underwater, they lost millions of dollars, and many of them went out of business, right, in the US 30 days ago, right? So no one likes natural gas. It's the most volatile commodity in the world except for electricity, right? And so tying electricity to natural gas is the dumbest thing that anyone could possibly do. So when you talk about natural gas being a bridge fuel, yes, because of Enron, we have 400,000 megawatts of natural gas generating capacity in the United States. We are going to use it as a flexible way of accommodating renewables and energy efficiency and all those things. But we are working tirelessly around the clock with utility companies to offset that because they hate the sort of like, oh, natural gas prices went from, what was it, like $3 and some a million BTU, now it's $4.71 just in like 4 months. We almost ran out of it. I mean, the EIA said we were 15 days away from running out of natural gas and storage in the United States during the polar vortex and some of these other things. I mean, there is no way that we're building this electricity grid in the United States and other people around the world on natural gas. It's not going to happen.
James, how do you, so the utilities hate it for the volatility reasons, and they argue that they hate renewables for other reasons, reliability, consistency, and things like that. What is the best argument against them? Notwithstanding the fact that Jigger says you don't have to make an argument against them because people are making money doing this anyway. But there is a real active lobbying effort against going down this road. So all you four on this panel, there are a whole bunch of CEOs of Fortune 100 companies who will say this is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, it's true that I think the market, the investment world, has done a very poor job of pricing the risk between these alternatives. There has been this sort of over-exuberance about the gas being a transformative resource. The reserves behave in a very different way to oil. Right? So the geology is really distinct. The pressure drops off very quickly. You have to drill a lot of holes. The geology varies immensely. So there's a huge difference between the nice, smooth Texas basin shape where horizontal drilling works really rather brilliantly. You can get in and travel a long way and you can extract a lot of resource. You compare that to the UK, for example, where we have a very substantial shale gas reserve, but it's very deep and it's blocked by all sorts of other geological structures that make it very difficult to. So it's pointless, and this happens in my country, I'm afraid. It's pointless for politicians to communicate to the public at large if we use this reserve, your bills are going to go down. I mean, this is ridiculous. Right? The reserves are very different. They perform differently. The costs will vary. The regulatory regimes will change. So I think there'll be a lot of money lost chasing the gas bonanza. Right?
Well, Shell has already admitted that.
Yeah. And a few have gone down already. Right? Their performance has not been brilliant. On the other hand, I think the markets have overpriced the risk associated with renewables, treating it as a kind of new technology that's complex and disruptive, which is the key to your question. Why would a CEO in a utility be uncomfortable about the growth of renewables? Well, because it messes with their business model. You know, if I can generate power off my own roof and my bills are estimated by my utility, if I have the power to generate it and the power to measure it with sensible systems inside my house, but also on my mobile phone, how much do I need my utility now? And how easy would it be for someone coming out of another sector, like, I don't know, the telecom sector, or the internet sector, or a systems business that understands how you put hardware and software together and how to bill customers? Why won't these businesses just become energy businesses as well? Because they understand what the consumer needs in order to be comfortable about the control they have over their lives. So it's not surprising to me that the incumbents don't like renewables because it messes with their business model. But I also believe that there's a chance to create substantial renewable energy, or possibly clean energy, including gas, pure plays of the type that Jigger created himself, where you start to see substantial players at the top end of the lists, in the FTSE 100 or the Fortune 500, who can attract institutional money, track a fund, index money, start to use some muscle in the political circles, and start to communicate to the public, listen, this technology is better than the old technology. It's going to give you more control over your lives. You'll like it more when you use it, right?
Well, and we're doing exactly that, right? So in the last 8 months, ALEC and the Koch brothers and the Edison Electric Institute has teamed up against solar. In the last 3 weeks, we defeated them in both Kansas and Oklahoma, where they thought they had so much power that they could just railroad us. In Oklahoma, they actually attached a bill to a bill that was moving to basically say we should tax solar. This is the Koch brothers actually passing a tax, which is interesting. And the governor of Oklahoma actually, through an executive order, basically vacated the law, right? In Oklahoma, you didn't expect that, but it happened, and it was Barry Goldwater Jr. that's leading the charge on this thing, right? And so in Kansas, we had the exact same thing. The Koch brothers thought they could just railroad a repeal of the Renewable Portfolio Standard. They got it through the House, and they couldn't get it taken up in the Senate. And so it died in the Senate in Kansas. We've won the last 11 conflicts with the Koch brothers in the last 8 months. And so I just think that the Koch brothers have finally met their match here, not because everyone believes in climate change, but because in America, people believe that you have the God-given right to generate your own power, and you shouldn't actually be told by the Koch brothers that you have to rely on your monopoly utility company for your power.
That's right.
Yeah, I just left after 17 wonderful years on the board of American Electric Power, which is one of the largest utilities in America. And I would say that that sector should be divided into 2 or 3 sectors. Generation is only one of them. Transmission and distribution are 2 others. And this is a big coal-fired utility that's spending an awful lot of money in partnership with Warren Buffett in building out transmission and distribution. So there are Mid-American, American Electric Power. There's a lot of utilities who are recognizing that the value proposition is switching from generation to transmission and distribution. So that's one thing to make remember, we're dealing with an electricity grid which is almost like the railroads, which are still using the same tracks that we did in 1865 at the end of the Civil War. We have a transmission and distribution system which in a stroke of one single act could probably create hundreds of thousands of jobs, create lower electricities, and you can't get it passed, again, through my favorite subject, Washington, D.C. All you would have to do is treat electricity like gas and allow interstate transmission builds. And you'd create hundreds of thousands of jobs. There would be no, and you'd probably create 100, 200 billion in private sector
Well,
capital.
you're a bit of a master at how you figure these out in terms of how you get money flow. How would you? What's the issue? Is this just a legislative block? Is this just lobbying pressure? Or is there a way to structure this so that this becomes as viable as you say?
Oh, I think you could do it, but the fact is that you have such an, look, Washington, D.C. has just surpassed Silicon Valley as the highest per capita income in America. Let me repeat that. Washington, D.C., with lawyers and lobbyists, excuse me, Rick.
No, and Sun Edison.
I wish I was one of them.
And Sun Edison was created in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and so, I mean, some of these work out well, but I think we have to be very cautious to fight a political battle. I would prefer to watch the inventive activity. I think you lose money in two instances if you make incorrect decisions about going short, okay? I think one thing you never short is ingenuity, okay? Mankind's ability to invent. That is critical. And number two, over the long run, you never short the environmentalists, because you always lose over the long term. And if you keep those in mind and you foster ingenuity and get private equity into inventive activity, I think that's how you get it. I want to make one sidebar comment about the European Union. It's very peculiar because I come out of a background of commodities 100 years ago. In the Jurassic era, I designed wheat and corn and soybean contracts, and we were always happy when you had surplus crops and prices were driven lower. We don't seem to be happy when you have great levels of emissions reductions and the price of buying these are driven lower. And let me kind of expand on this before you jump out of your seat, Rick, okay? The European Union's objective from 2008 to 2012 was to cut emissions by 8%. They cut it by 17%, twice of the goal, and all people did was complain about the low price of carbon, okay? In spite of the fact that the efficacy of the program worked brilliantly. There are two separate things. Price is a signal, and it is not an outcome. The outcome is getting food and getting clean air. The outcome is not to get a price that's high. It's really to redirect resources to their highest and most efficient use. To that extent, we need to focus on that. I agree, I understand that sometimes the political goals, Rick, are such that you have problems, as you did with Reggie, where the prices were set too low in retrospect and they restructured it. Europe is doing that. Also, I think I wouldn't underestimate the European commitment to a clean environment. Right. And I wouldn't short their ability or short the environmental movement in Europe. They'll get around to fixing it, but in the meantime, they've doubled what they promised to achieve.
I agree.
And
I don't think it's because of carbon. I think it's because of great sectoral policies on renewable electricity and $9 a gallon gasoline.
Exactly.
But,
and in fact, the renewable energy policy, and we're back to, you can say it was the Great Recession, but in fact, German industrial production is higher now than it was in 07, 08. So, which is the major driver. And industrial production output in Europe is still high.
Well, that's an issue worth examining, why Germany has been so particularly successful on this front. But I know Rick is jumping out of his seat.
Well, no, I mean, look, I mean, you know, I've made my career in helping clients navigate these markets, and I'm a big proponent of the markets, and Richard deserves a whole bunch of credit in this country for getting folks thinking about pricing carbon in markets. And so there's no doubt that as a policy instrument, that's a very compelling way to go. My point, and I wanted to just respond to sort of what Jigger was saying. My point was not that renewables are not compelling, that they're not growing at great rates, that they're not the future. That all of that is true. My point is that they are and will be for a long time, because of the embedded fossil infrastructure and interests. They will be competing with incumbents, and they will need policy interventions to get them to scale quicker than the normal sort of growth of a nascent industry would otherwise go.
And, the incumbents constantly say that those policy incentives are there and that they're unfair and they're anti-competitive.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so you're saying they may need them and may need more of them.
We need more.
You ask any of the incumbents, they'll say.
Well, let me just finish, Jigger. Let me just finish, because there's two clocks ticking. One is the normal economic clock and industries and people's investments and how are they relevant from an investment time horizon and so forth. The other clock that's ticking here that is unconcerned about our issues is the environmental clock, is the climate clock. And the scientists are telling us that we have until about 2030 to really get this thing turned around big time, start managing it down very, very low. And if we look at the pace, as good as it is, as exciting as it is, there are a lot of roadblocks in the way. And to get to where we need to be in the next decade, basically, in terms of the scale of renewables, will require clarity in policy and the will of politicians to do what, as of yet, DC has been unwilling to do.
So it's not DC.
I completely disagree with you.
Not DC per se, okay?
Well, right.
The United
Maybe
States.
it's bottom up.
Let me get 2 minutes in response to what you're saying. Number one, if you look at our emissions as a nation, right, we are going down and dramatically. So, and it's because of things like what this man to my left does, okay, the entrepreneurs in energy, the renewable portfolio standards, et cetera. The problem comes very candidly from China and India, okay, right now. It's not coming from
When you say the problem, you
the
growth of carbon emissions.
The growth of carbon emissions. It's really all coming out of the developing world. And there it's a matter of trading off poverty and lifting, 300-400 million Indians out of rural poverty, 600 million Chinese, and how do you balance political stability in those regions with the need for them to have a decent life, unencumbered by dirty air, dirty water, things like that. And so I think that we need to focus on those particular countries, encourage their appetite for markets and pricing these externalities to allow for entrepreneurs in the solar and the renewable energies there, for people, especially in this world where everybody is chasing yield. And you know far more about it, but I'm involved. You can still get very attractive yields in the renewable energy business. You can get 9-10% unlevered, 15-20% on not a very levered basis. And I was just at a luncheon on the Global Capital Market Advisory Council, and you've got these trillions of dollars trying to find productive ways to employ it, and they're not exactly.
As you said, long money and short deals.
They're
that's right.
long money and short
And
deals.
they love renewables. I mean, uniformly. I mean, the thing I disagree with you, Enric, is that when you talk to any independent agency, whether it's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change or whether you talk about the International Energy Agency, they will tell you that renewable electricity is on track and, in fact, ahead of schedule. And to the extent that we need to do about $1 trillion a year of deployment to actually get ahead of the 2 degrees goal, renewable electricity is carrying its full weight, if not more.
Let's take a look at slide 4 while we're talking about
the
this.
challenge that we have is that we're not keeping up in transportation, we're not keeping up in agriculture, we're not keeping up in mining, we're not keeping up in industrial emissions reductions from energy efficiency that's available there, and we're only
So let me just
now,
be clear. Your energy, or electricity and energy production, you're saying we're ahead of schedule.
We're ahead of schedule. I mean, this notion that even like Ray Kurzweil, right, the famous futurist, is now saying that renewable energy is on such a J curve that it's unstoppable, right? I mean, he doesn't have to say anything, right? He's at Google doing his thing, and he believes now that we've hit a tipping point with renewable electricity such that the costs are so low and the ability for us to build a number of projects. I mean, solar energy, just to put this in perspective for people, globally, new power plant production, including China and India and everything else, is about $400 billion a year. $100 billion of that is solar, right? Fathom that for just a second. More money goes into new solar generating assets than new wind, new nuclear, new gas, new coal, new geothermal, new biomass. All of them, right?
Solar is number
one,
please. Slide
right?
3.
So the average solar power project in the world is only $200,000 in size. We are doing $100 billion a year, $200,000 at a time. It is extraordinary how democratic solar has become so very quickly.
Let me kind of throw up slide 15. Even Chris Christie likes solar.
That's so true. Yeah. No, I mean, when he pulled out of RGGI, he said, look, I don't like the way RGGI is structured, but I am not changing the renewable energy mandates in the state of New Jersey. I couldn't agree more. I just think that what gives me hope is, one, the largest wealth creation opportunity on the planet is what we're doing. Bar none. No one can argue with that, right? $10 trillion of capital is what we need. We know where to get it. With the yield codes and other stuff's happening, raising that money isn't going to be a problem for us. Actually, finding the deals is the problem. Yeah. Once we find the deals, the money will flow. I'm not worried about that. The challenge we have is when you look at what solar has done, T. Boone Pickens has not been able to get that done in converting diesel-powered trucks to natural gas in this country. We still haven't been able to get that done in terms of energy efficiency, block by block, house by house. And we will get there, but we haven't yet.
So T. Boone Pickens wasn't able to get that. He's here. He's walking around the halls.
Yeah.
He's in the room. Because of the collapse in the price of natural gas.
No. His problem is that when you think about the embedded infrastructure within diesel, even though the cost of burning, or fueling a diesel truck is, let's call the equivalent of $1.80 a gallon of diesel fuel, and the payback is 2 years and everything's hunky-dory, et cetera, it's hard to figure out. Penske does a lot of the O&M for all those trucks. They don't actually do enough O&M on the natural gas side. Westport has an engine. People don't like paying the usurious premiums that they're trying to charge for their natural gas engine technology. There's a lot of those gaps, which we solved in solar, that they have not solved in the deployment of natural gas engines. He thought that if the federal government came down with a very heavy stick of tax credits and stuff like that, that would move faster, and he was probably right. But we're moving that way. Peterbilt and Bluebird and everyone else are shipping a record number of natural gas vehicles, even though the Ukraine today has more natural gas vehicles than the United States does. But we're getting there. But I think that what's inspiring to the people on Al Jazeera America or CNBC or all these business shows is that solar has gotten to $100 billion, $200,000 at a time. Yeah. So you can see how we use the same exact infrastructure, legal constructs, financing constructs to do that for natural gas conversion of diesel trucks. We do that with the conversion for anaerobic digesters for organic waste around the world. We do that for battery storage. We do that for wood pellets. There's lots of technologies that have been around for 20 years plus that have not enjoyed the success that solar has. And solar is an inspiration.
Let me ask you something. First of all, I want to put out there that I'm going to go out to you with questions in just a moment. And James, I'll let you answer my question and make your point at the same time. As far as the media is concerned, the last big story about solar was how Solyndra failed and was guaranteed by the U.S. government in terms of mainstream media, right? So the impression that many people are left with is that solar was not viable. and that policies to encourage these things do nothing but cost taxpayers money. So I do want to get your comment on the disconnect between that narrative and your experience in a minute. But let me talk to James.
Well, I'm happy to stay with that flow because it's not bad as an introduction to my observations on this conversation on the panel. Extraordinary that is what's left in people's minds, as if there was never a wasted public dollar on fossil fuels, as if there was never any subsidy provided to the fossil fuel industry over a couple of hundred years. I mean, it's patently absurd, and it's remarkable to me that that should linger in the mind. And it tells you a lot also about sometimes, you know, who exercises editorial control over some of these reporting stories. Absolutely mad that that should be the story, but it is very important to acknowledge that it is. Unfortunately, there are newspapers in the UK, channels in the UK, we mentioned Wall Street Journal already, who persistently carry stories that renewables don't work, or they're highly expensive, or they're sort of inefficient in some other way. It's amazing. But it tells you something about incumbent power. It doesn't really tell you anything approaching the reality. And actually what we need to be communicating, it's both true of the climate change story and of the efficacy of these technologies. This is real world fact. When the IPCC reports, that's the real world we live in. Right? There's not some nostalgic backward looking place where there was no threat from climate change, and nor is there a place where the old technologies work, so why do we need the new ones? Now, my observation on the panel's discussion is I'm afraid a kind of not either or, but both one. It clearly makes a difference if you have specific public policy measures that favor clean technologies, whether they're related to renewables directly or whether they're carbon pricing, carbon valuing mechanisms. And Richard is right that carbon pricing in Europe to a large extent worked. In fact, it worked too well. It produced too much supply, and politicians were not able to respond fast enough to its success. So we had an oversupply of credits from all over the world, and I know something about that, so does Richard. Having put $1 billion,
lots of scars.
having put $1 billion in a market that lost a lot of value. But the fact is that I also know, and I was at an impact investing session earlier today, is that mainstream investors' money caused 100 million tons of carbon to be reduced in a very short period of time around the world.
So notwithstanding the bad investment.
And what we discovered is that it was very cheap to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that discovery is of huge value to the world. And the markets did that. So, and the Europeans are trying to reshape the market.
Can you fix that problem?
Yeah, the markets
Richard or James, can you fix that problem? In other words, can you do that again, not lose money on it, and reduce that much carbon?
Absolutely, because we've learned. And it is happening. And valuing carbon, because I want to use that phrase, it may not be a price signal, right? It may be regulatory in some parts of the world. It could be a fiscal instrument in some parts of the world. I happen to think, as Richard knows, that some form of tradable mechanism is best for crossing economies, right? So I still believe that's the right way to go, and I think the European unions are going to persevere with this method. And China also has gone down that route. But the other observation I have after 10 years of climate change capital's investments is that renewables are going to win on price. Yeah. Renewables are going to win on cost. Renewables are going to win on attractiveness to consumers. Renewables will win because they're combined with other technologies like smartphones giving you tremendous data. Big data is going to help renewables. Renewables are going to win because the system that is best for delivering renewables is best. It's more robust, it's more secure, it'll make people feel safer, it's geopolitically advantageous, it reduces risk in security terms. So the vision of the future based around renewables and DC technologies and management of energy systems and a closer connection between supply and demand in real time, this will win out because it's an improved system. And by the way, it takes tons of carbon out fast, which is also good. But it will win because it's better. And it's better because it's cheaper and provides these additional values. It will need public policy, but not that much and not for that long. If we could get rid of fossil fuel subsidies at the same time, watch how it would go.
We came, I wouldn't say we came close, but we came as close as it was going to be in the last few years in Congress a few years ago, and then it didn't, it just died. I mean, we have a better chance of getting Congress to pass a budget than we do of getting them to have some logical, informed discussion about this. I mean, we're not even close, Rick. We're not even close.
This goes back to the rent seekers and the way Washington did. I was working on that bill, and I went into, and these are smart, well-meaning people, but let me give you a model to consider. I was working on the bill to cap greenhouse gases, and I went into someone's office who virtually all of you would know, a very renowned politician. For the sake of discretion, his name will not be mentioned. And I said to that politician and the politician's staff, I had two incidences which I think are worthwhile reporting. I said, let me come in and I don't have a particular ask. I would like to tell you what I got right and what I got wrong in a big experiment involving 110 industrial emitters from IBM and Honeywell and Reliance and Ford Motor Company. And the response that I got was, we don't talk to anybody until after we write the legislation. And so I walked out of that office, James, and I said, well, this is a very peculiar notion. That is the dumbest thing I have ever heard in my life. And then about a week later, I said to myself, as you begin to talk to yourself when you talk about climate and politics. So I was having a lot of conversations with myself
So true.
over the time. And so I said to myself, wait a second. That's actually a very smart thing to do, because consider this conjecture, that in today's society where money drives politics, why don't you design bad legislation, thereby optimizing the people who will pay for access to fix what's bad? And the worse it is, the higher the campaign contributions, and therefore the higher the probability of re-elections. Now, Ollie, that may be a little cynical, but
A little cynical.
I wish it was that. I wish they were that smart about it.
I just saw my producer.
but that's a conjecture.
I just saw my producer walk in, which means that we're ending in 15 minutes. So I would like to open it up to comments from some of you. I mean, I can keep on going with this for about 3 hours. This is fantastic. But I suspect some of you might have some questions. We have a microphone, so if you do, if you don't, trust me, these guys can keep talking. But if there's anybody out there who'd like to ask, put up your hand. Okay, let's start with this woman right here, and then in the front row.
Okay, well, let's see. What about Elon Musk? What about selling electric cars in China? What about production of electric cars? His production of batteries in the U.S. And I'm just going to say it. I have solar on my own home. It costs me about $30 a month to power my home and my electric car.
Yeah, but I bet it never works, right?
I drove it here.
That's
So.
excellent.
No, look,
Well, Elon Musk, it's quite remarkable the effect that he's had on the whole concept of batteries.
No, I think that's right. I think Richard said it right, which is that we should be betting on innovation and ingenuity. Elon represents that, as well as myself and 50 other folks that are doing great work, I think, in this space. I think that the challenge with electric vehicles, in terms of the scale at which we're talking, is that when you look at hybrid electric cars, which have been around a long time, Priuses, let's say, Priuses only represent 1% of all of the vehicles in the United States, even now, 10 years on, right? And when you think about how many hybrid electric cars you need to save a gigaton of carbon, which is, I think what we're talking about in terms of climate change, it's over 200 million of them. We have roughly 2 million. So I think one of the challenges that we see is we actually see on Ray Kurzweil's curve that we're there on renewable energy. On electric vehicles, I think what we're missing is that the notion that I'm going to trade in this car payment for that car payment in electric vehicles and savings on fuel is fairly ridiculous.
But as that comes down,
but it won't come down. I mean, so what'll happen is what we did in solar is not reduce the cost of solar, although that did happen. What we did was increase the value of solar. So the value of electric vehicles is a couple-fold, right? You only drive your car 3% of the time. The other 97% of the time you park it somewhere. you actually have the ability to integrate that car into the grid and use it to back up all the renewable energy and everything else in the country. And Elon Musk has said publicly that he will be the first car company to allow that to happen in the next few years. When that happens, you will get paid more by the electric utility company than your car payment. For that. Once that happens, the value of the electric car now becomes systematically more valuable than a gasoline car, and that's what takes off, right? So this notion that batteries are going to get cheaper and therefore everyone's going to pay an extra $5,000 for an electric car instead of $50,000 or $20,000, and then it's going to take off is ridiculous.
Ali,
It's the value equation that
there are a
is going
couple
to
of
happen
things
there.
that we would draw from that, because I agree totally. What's really interesting about this particular technology solution is how it combines with others. I just want to keep coming round and round and round. This is a system problem. It needs system solutions. We shouldn't really ever be having discussions about renewables on their own anyway. You know, it's renewables with several other things combined that make a transformation. But the other thing I like about the Elon Musk story is that he figured out quite early on that design was important, right? That beauty was important, right? Aspiration, aesthetics, desire to have something valuable. The object itself is attractive and alluring. And the transformation we must make for all these hard scientific reasons, that they're really punishing barriers that have been set up by the use of fossil fuels over many, many years. Not that that just happened as a result of great innovation in the past too, but we know we've got a problem. We're not going to resolve that problem by punishing people. We won't resolve that problem by looking for perfect human beings with perfect choices. We have a decent chance of resolving that problem by making the future alluring, by producing attractive objects that people will want to use, and by building a system response that's easy to use and delivers multiple benefits, produces value.
Let me kind of put one thing, which I think your question prompts, and I'll try to finish it in 2 minutes, just as somebody who is a student of inventive activity and published academically in that, to an inventor who's failed and succeeded, sometimes, both on big and little magnitudes. And one observation is I found to be generally true, practically and academically, is that it takes 20 years to get a new idea off the ground. And basically, if you take a look at even the personal computer, I taught at Northwestern. It didn't use PCs until 7 years after. They were still using typewriters in Medill School of Journalism, well after the personal computer was invented, okay? And so if you take a look at PCs from 75 to 95, 20 years to get to the web. I was involved in something called financial futures, and we started in '69 here in California when rates started to wiggle. It really took till '80s till lots of banks failed by borrowing short-term and investing long-term. Carbon, the same thing. So you want to take a look at industrial cycle or financial invention as a 20-year proposition. First 15% are just because they're first movers, right? So they try to does it. The Tesla and the electric car, in my opinion, is a computer with an automobile attached, right? So the first 15% are just people who like novel uses, upscale, sorts of things. But it tips very quickly. I mean, in my lifetime and your lifetime, you'd never thought the Washington Post was a terrible financial asset, nor the LA Times, nor Barnes and Nobles. I mean, look at what's tripped, how long it was in the making, and then watch its downfall. And if you're guided by anything, try to look at when the start date was and where you are in a 20-year cycle. Okay. And I think you might use that as a tool to get some insight into when that what looked like as a temporary disruption became solidified.
Right. I think we have time for one question over here in the front row.
Yeah, I guess the question, and it was actually referred to again, I think, with reselling energy from your car. Part of, I guess the utilities would say, that's easy when you're selling it at 5 times what it costs them to generate. How do you continue to do that, and where does that settle out, do you think?
Well, I mean, you have to think about it logically first, which is that utilities, their logic is what Richard was talking about, which is that you have generation, transmission, and retail, right? And for them, each of those components compete with competitors within that component stack, right? So generators compete with generators. As a retail electricity user, you basically made an unconscious decision to be part of a collective, right? That because you and a million other people are part of a utility system, you get cheaper power. At the time at which Walmart and other people, including you as a residential consumer, believe that you can generate power cheaper than you can generate power being part of the collective, which is where Walmart is today. And that's why Walmart has an RFP saying that they want to put solar in every single store it has nationwide, including Idaho, Kentucky, and other places where the economics may not quite work yet. Then they're going to actually disconnect from the system. So the utilities say, that's unfathomable. Why would people possibly want to unconnect from the system? Well, J.D. Power and Associates has an answer. They are by far the most hated company set in the United States, by far, for the last 10 years running. And so you can imagine that there is a percentage of people who have an American independence streak who say that we would like to not be part of this big bad monopoly. I mean, a lot of Tea Party folks are anti-big government and anti-big corporate. And so now they decide to do this stuff, and you have a run on the bank, right? The more people buy less power from the utility, the more they have to raise rates to pay fixed debt service, the more it becomes attractive for people to leave the grid, the more people basically, raise rates. And it just keeps going, and that's exactly the death spiral that they're in right now. I think that just like the telephone business, there will absolutely be a need for reliability, and the utilities will be paid for that service. That's right. But that service is worth about 2/3 off their current market cap. And so pretty much the smartest hedge fund managers I know were all shorting utilities and going long renewables.
We have time for one more question over there. This gentleman over there. Yeah. Keep your hand up so she can get you the mic. Okay, there we go. We'll have to have quick answers on this. We got a couple minutes.
So I think that for me the key takeaway, or one of the key takeaways of this is that renewables will win based on overall value. And so when we look at that, and just to the last gentleman's discussion about 20-year cycles and disruption, how should we think? If you could give us any more insight, how should we think about ways in which we would value existing carbon assets in the ground? And is the market completely out to lunch on this, or is it rational?
Very simple.
So very briefly, because it's a big conversation, the market is concerned that they have improperly valued the carbon assets in the ground. It is not able really to do very much about that yet, bar some notable examples are just beginning. And I think some of the disinvestment decisions being made, relatively small scale so far in the US, but gathering momentum. And then in Europe, and particularly in Norway, with maybe very symbolically the Norwegian Petroleum Pension Fund, thinking seriously about whether they stop investing in fossil fuel assets. But at the very least, something is happening now, which is a recalibration of risk. Perhaps institutional investors are saying to themselves, we have mispriced fossil fuel corporate assets to date, because we've assumed that 1, all the reserves are there. 2, they will all be exploited. 3, we use current fossil fuel prices to anticipate the future price. 4, we discount completely to zero any regulatory intervention that changes the price. We have no price for water either, so a vital resource that goes with fossil fuels is not adequately priced. And therefore, there's a risk that we've got the prices wrong, and they're pouring money into further exploration, which we can't burn. If we do, we're in trouble from a climate point of view. So why don't you perhaps repatriate some of that money and give us some dividend yields, or more of them today, whilst we think about allocating away from fossil fuels to something else. And the something else has to produce yields that are comparable. Otherwise, the pensions have massive holes, and they're already terrified that they're not be able to meet their beneficiaries' needs. So you need to have risk evaluation changing on the fossil fuels matched quickly and immediately by opportunity to invest for yield in something else, which my belief is probably going to be infrastructure, physical assets, and I hope that they will be increasingly clean energy or related physical assets.
It's an excellent question, Richard.
Yeah, I think just to follow on James' point and go, I think what you need to look at is the fossil fuel and all of the, what economists call negative externalities associated with it. So to the extent that you're looking at oil, you have to think of the carbon that comes from using that oil and what the price of carbon is, and to take away that, because ultimately that revenue will be stripped away through regulation or a market. You have to look at coal and strip away the cost of sulfur dioxide, mercury, NOx, and carbon. You have to take a look at natural gas and take away water pricing, okay, and potentially negative impacts on the table and things like this. So you start with the asset, you subtract the negative outputs to the extent they can be priced explicitly or implicitly, and you get a net value. And then recognize, my experience in commodity trading is anything will trade in the bear market at 40% below its intrinsic value. And that's where you get the low side from.
Thank you for your time. We are out of time, but I appreciate all of you coming and our great panelists. Thank you so much.